So this is number 13, and it's going to be a challenging one, just like number 12 was. But believe me, it's going to be all downhill from there. My name's Dr. Steve Simpson. I'm an elite performance coach, a mind coach, and that means that I work with people just like you. So what are we going to talk about? Well, first of all, a very, very quick recap on last week where we talked about synchronicity. And synchronicity is a word that was coined by Carl Jung back in 1920, something like that, I think. And I won't, if you want to know more about this, then I suggest you go back to last week's show. But in summary, synchronicity, according to Carl Jung, is a meaningful coincidence. Or if that sounds a bit too simple for you, get your head around a falling together in time. Now, I had quite a few comments from last week's show, which is great. I welcome them, but I'm sorry to say I had a complaint. Apparently, I was too serious. So I do apologize for that. I'm sure that it's true. As I say, I was going to say if I was, I'm sure that I was. And the reason would be that I was overthinking, because there aren't many people who can explain synchronicity or collective unconscious. And so I guess I was trying too hard to do the best job that I could. So I'll do my best to be less serious this week. I don't think I'm going to tell any jokes, but I will try and be nice and smiley. So sorry about that. Anyway, one reason why I might have been too serious last week is that it's only in retrospect that I'm realizing that in actual fact, it might have been better if I'd done this show about the collective unconscious first. And I only discovered that at about 3 o'clock this morning. Something woke me up. There we are. We've talked about things like that before. And I was thinking about tonight's show, not that I was worrying about it, but suddenly things fell into place. Now, at 3 o'clock in the morning, it's quite easy to be self-deluded. So these things that I thought fell into place might not have done. But anyway, I'm going to try them on you, and I'll come on to why I think if I had to do this show again, I'd do them in a different order. So, first question, sounding like a journalist here, I'm going to do the whys, whats, hows, wheres, and why-fors. Why is this subject important? Well, I'll tell you why. Here we are. The book, again, not an advertising plug, but if you do buy it, you're almost guaranteed to get lucky. Get lucky now, it's on Amazon. And why I can say that you're pretty much guaranteed to get lucky, because I talk about the 7 secrets of lucky people. And 6 of those, I don't think too many people these days would argue about how important they can be. And some of you will be doing these 6 things already. But from my experience, not many people do all of the 6. And even if they do, not many of them exploit them to the maximum potential. And most people are not doing those at all. So there you are. Those are the 6 secrets that will help just about everyone. Now, the 7th secret, and I call that chapter magic, is the one that I enjoy the most. This is when my clients don't rise just to the next level, but they rise several levels above that. And they don't know why, and I don't know why. But it's very exciting. And in that chapter, I go into a few theories. I talk about quantum theory, which I'm definitely not going to talk about today, you'll be pleased to know. But I do start to develop some ideas about Carl Jung's views. So that's why this subject is important. It is really, to me, it's the foundation of attracting more luck into your life. And if you don't watch this video and the one before, if you don't watch any others than those 2, then you'll be well on the way on your journey, the journey that Jung called individuation. So I've already mentioned the who. Carl Jung was, again, the person who came up with his theories of the collective unconscious. And he doesn't rush into things, despite the fact that he published a huge amount of work and spent even more time in meticulous research across a whole breadth of different subjects. He first mentioned the collective unconscious in 1921 in an essay that he wrote, which, as far as I know, was not greatly read by many people at that time. And then he presented it 30 years later in 1951 at St. Bartholomew's Hospital in London, not too far from where I am. In fact, last week I said that he talked about synchronicity there, and I think I might have got those two confused. It's possible it was the same place. But it was a 30-year gap. Well, no, actually it was a 20-year gap. I think the essay was published in 1916, and it was 1936 when he presented his paper. That's a 20-year gap. And those other dates that I think I might have given you were the ones that related to synchronicity. So anyway, the point is that there was a 20 or 30-year gap between his original ideas and the time when he felt that he'd got his ideas well enough glued together to be able to talk about them in public and publish them to a much wider audience. And these have, his thoughts have an enduring quality. I mean, they're still at least as popular now, maybe even more so than they were then. So what is the collective unconscious? It is defined as the structure of the unconscious mind, which is shared by beings of the same species. In other words, it's something that we inherit, and it could be that we inherit some of the elements of this unconscious mind right from the year dot, right from when human beings became human beings. And it's more than possible, as I'll mention later, that it could go back a lot further than that. Now, of course, Jung didn't know hardly anything about genetics in his lifetime, but we know a lot more about inheritance and the role that DNA plays. So it's not inconceivable that these things in our mind can be transmitted through the generations. And in fact, we know that this happens in many animals. There's been very famous experiments that have been done on rats. You can train rats by giving them rewards of lumps of cheese to find a way through a maze. And then when they have their babies, you can separate them from their mothers and the fathers, and the babies still know where to find the cheese. So something has passed on to them, and it can't be anything else than through the genes. Jung and Freud worked together, and in fact, Jung was the student of Freud for 8 years. And as so often in that kind of relationship, sooner or later, they split apart. And as I said, their adventures together lasted 8 years. But Jung does give some credit to Freud for his fascination with the unconscious mind and for some of his thoughts on this similar subject of the collective unconscious. And Freud called it, he said that we're affected, or our thoughts are affected at a deep level by archaic remnants. Now, we don't know exactly what he meant by that, but I'm guessing that he thought they were things that in the past, when we were far more primitive and far less evolved, might have been important then, but are not important now. Well, if he did think that, then, sorry, Professor Freud, Dr. Freud, you couldn't have been more wrong, because we're now beginning to understand, and it's taken us a long time, that in fact, what inhabits our reptile brain, that is the bit right at the bottom of our brain, and the bit upon which all of the other layers of our evolution have built, that part of the primitive brain still exerts a huge effect on our thoughts and our consciousness, and not always for the best. So our veneer, our wish to be seen as a civilized, highly advanced species are a bit way off. In fact, this veneer of civilization is wafer thin, and at times of extreme stress, it falls apart and reveals the reptile that lies just below the surface. But don't worry too much about that. Why is the reptile important? Well, I've mentioned the role that it plays in these primitive, very primitive emotions, many of which are connected to survival. But at a higher level of thinking, it affects our whole life. It affects us throughout our life, because the way that we clothe these vague, abstract thoughts that surface one way or another in our life dictates to a large extent what we do with our life and where our life takes us. As I mentioned, Jung called this an individuation, and it goes in completely different directions for everybody. And he says that individuation is the way we reconcile the thoughts from our unconscious mind with our higher conscious levels. And if we're lucky, as a result of that, we are on a journey towards spirituality. But of course, it doesn't always work out as cleanly as that, because we can go, in broad terms, one of two directions. These thoughts that come from our unconscious, our collective unconscious, can be used when they're processed by the higher centers for us to be a better person, whatever that might be, or to be a worse person, whatever that might be. And we'll all have our thoughts. And one of the conundrums that has fascinated people through the ages and fascinates me is, what is it about us as people? How, on the one hand, can we be altruistic, generous, loving, kind, compassionate, caring for strangers, and on the other hand, capable of terribly bestial acts and depravities and cruelty and mass murder? How can this happen in our species? Well, it happens because of our reptile brain and how some people process information one way or another. Einstein, he had views on this, and he said he believed in determinism. We might talk about that one day. But he said that people were pretty much hardwired from birth, and that one way or another things were going to work out, either for the good or the worse. And when he was asked about how he feels about a murderer, he said, well, I certainly don't condone what they do. I understand what they do, but I wouldn't invite them to dinner. That's a kind of a bit of a cop-out. So there we are. It can be good or bad. But when it's good, Jung said that it's a sign that there's a deeper meaning to life and a deeper order and a deeper structure in our mind. And he wasn't alone, because Jung knew Einstein. They had dinner many times. They shared conversations and letters. And so too did Jung with Wolfgang Pauli, who himself was a Nobel Prize winner in quantum mechanics, just like Einstein was. And Pauli, in particular, was fascinated by Jung's work. And in fact, they called it this individuation, this journey towards spirituality, as the unus mundus. And I don't know very much Latin, but I think that means a whole world or one world or something like that. Now, what can come, what actually is inside? I'm just going to, I have a couple of comments here. So before I go any further, I'm just going to, oh dear. Okay, somebody can't quite make it. They're just saying they're going to catch you later. That's okay, Laura, no problem at all. So here we are. What is in the collective unconscious? Well, there's the archaic remnants that Freud referred to. There's archetypes, which is another topic that Jung spent his whole life thinking about. We may not go into that in any detail, but archetypes really are all the kind of personality types that reflect the spectrum of human life. And there are the base instincts that we've talked about. And these are things like hunger, but survival. But one of them is creativity. Now that is interesting. That interests me particularly, because of all of the emotions, then creativity has got to be right up there. And if this is something that is lurking in the unconscious, the collective unconscious, then we've really got to have a search for it. And, you know, I would not be surprised at all if it's this creativity that surfaces in some of my clients that produces the results that we don't understand. That is pretty much the most important things that I know about the collective unconscious. And the question then is, well, how do we use it? Well, the good news is it's a bit like synchronicity. I did warn people last week that this was going to be a difficult one to explain, as is this one. But you don't need to know any of the background that I've talked about. Some of you will be interested, and for some of you, it will help you to make a leap from a leap of faith, indeed, as one of the questions that has been posted to me mentioned. But if you can tap into the synchronicities, oh yes, I'll explain. I was going to say why I thought I might have done these programs in the wrong order. And the reason is collective unconscious, the archaic remnants, the instincts, the archetypes, all of these are churning away 24 hours a day, the ones that, woke me up at 3 o'clock this morning. And most of the time, we're completely unaware of everything that's going on in there, which is probably just as well, because as I said, these are rather reptilian. But sometimes they surface. And I think, my view, is that what makes them surface is this synchronicity. Somehow things make sense enough so that they will be recognized by the conscious mind, and then we can act on it. That is, assuming we trust the synchronicity that has happened to us. So if we do, what's going to happen to us? If we can get more in touch with the synchronicities that are rising in our mind, how is this going to help us? Well, I've already mentioned, it's going to stimulate a lot more creative thought. And creative thought is going to be fresh thought. Now, when we talked about money, as an example, I said, well, one of the problems about money is the way we think about it. And often if we can get some fresh thoughts about money, separate ourselves from the emotion of it, that can lead us in a different direction where some of the money problems may, if we're really lucky, start to take care of themselves. So more creativity is going to lead to more fresh thoughts. This is almost certainly going to raise our performance to at least one level, and in some cases, quite a few levels above that. And for all of us, it's going to be less stress. Now, if I'd really been able to embrace 100% the collective unconscious, I wouldn't have had to do any research this week. I'd have just come in front of this camera, just like I do normally for any camera, any microphone, any live audience. I just turn up and I see what happens to my mouth. But I didn't. And that's probably why I was being a bit too serious last week. And I hope I'm not so serious this week, because I feel that my 3 o'clock in the morning interrupted sleep was in a good cause, because at least I think I understand it a little bit better, and I hope you do too. And I'm really glad that I've got some questions, because they're real examples that actually then should make things a little more clear to you. And that is why it can be less stressful, because problems cause, by and large, when people overthink stuff and over-prepare stuff. It's not easy to be more laid back about this and just show up and see what happens, because there's part of our brain saying, well, this is just the lazy approach. It's the not caring, it's the not preparing, and it's not going to lead to a good performance. Well, obviously some preparation is necessary, but generally speaking, there's a very thin line between over-preparation and overthinking. So if we are struggling to get this, as I know some of you will be, and as I know I am frequently, what are the ways that we can, that will help us to connect to our collective unconscious and to the synchronicities? Well, there are only 3 that I know that are powerful and that work. I'm sure we've mentioned at least 2 of these before. One of them is meditation. It's a way of quietening the mind, and when the conscious mind is quiet, easier for things to percolate up. Mindfulness, very similar to meditation. It does the same thing. It's being in the moment, allowing stuff to come up. And then the third subject is through hypnosis. Now, hypnosis is a fascinating subject. It is probably the only thing in my life where I am world class or near to it. And funnily enough, I hardly ever mention hypnosis, even to my clients. I hardly ever talk about it. But I decided it's about time that I did. Not today, but lined up for the next 2 or 3 shows. We are going to take these thoughts a little further. We're going to talk about meditation. We're going to talk about mindfulness. And we're going to talk about hypnosis. And in fact, we might even do a live hypnosis on air for all of you and see where that one takes us. Though, of course, I will stress that that is only for people who are relaxing at home. If you're driving a bus, flying a plane, or sailing a boat, then that is something that you listen to afterwards. So that is for the future. Now let's get on to the questions. We've got we've got a few minutes left. They're all good questions, by the way. Stuart asked me, do animals have a collective unconscious? Well, when I gave the definition of beings of the same species sharing this inherited unconsciousness, then I think that Jung probably suggested that other animals do. But even if he didn't, I'm going to give you my opinion. My opinion is definitely they do. I mean, we think that instincts are not so important for us, but in animals, particularly the animals who have little brain at all, instinctive behavior is of huge importance to them. And they do inherit that. And examples of a collective unconsciousness in animals that occur to me is those swarms of birds that we sometimes see when the birds all gather, thousands and thousands, and they fly in this vortex. I mean, how they're not all colliding with each other and falling out of the sky amazes me. But they're stunning things if you've ever seen them. And if you haven't, then look on, swarms on YouTube, and you'll find some really good videos. And the same thing with fish. When fish, for some reason all get together in the sea and they form these same swirling vortexes. So, and that's something going on. And I could say the same comments about bees and stuff like that. So, yeah, I'm sure that animals are bound together in some way by this. Indeed, I could even extrapolate further and say that the cells in our own body, I mean, when we watch blood flowing through the body, then it has its own patterns and it forms its own shapes and everything. And particularly when there's any inflammation in the body, the way the cells move to it, that shows not intelligence, but some kind of learned behavior, even at a cellular level. So Deepak Chopra wrote about this a long time ago now in his book, Quantum Healing, but his views continue to gain more and more traction. So the answer to that question, Stuart, is yes. I do think animals do. Ian wrote in, and he said he's actually asked another question as well, but this is the first one. I don't know whether he wanted me to answer it on air, but I'm going to. He said, on your website and on your webinar page, you have, what is that circle with a vertical line going through it? Is it Greek? Well, Ian, it is Greek, and it's my symbol. And in another program, I'll probably talk about symbols and what they do, but call it like a trademark. Nike has that little tick thing, and we know that our Apple computers have the bite out of the apple. So I've got something like a simple thing like that. Circle to me means a holistic approach to life. The line down the middle, well, I thought I am a doctor, so that's my equivalent of a medical staff. It is a Greek letter and an ancient Greek letter, and the letter is phi, spelt P-H-I. And I didn't know until recently that actually it is the symbol of the golden ratio. So I'm mightily honored to have chosen that one, because the golden ratio, that's a program on its own. So, and then he, there's another question here. Oh, from Joe, okay. And then I've got two more that are posted on the webinar page. Joe, how do I know the difference between intuition and the collective unconscious? Well, I don't think you need to know the difference, and they are very closely related. How I would say is that intuition comes from the collective unconscious and is very similar to the synchronicity. So the same tools are going to work: meditation, mindfulness, hypnosis, whichever way you're going to do it. And so How do I know the difference? There isn't much difference, so don't worry about it. There's plenty to worry about in life, so I wouldn't worry about that one. Charlie writes in, I describe myself as average intelligence, not intellectual, struggling to grasp concepts. Einstein got it. Is this the reason why I find it tricky? Well, I guess Charlie is saying, is it the reason I find it tricky because you're of average intelligence? No, I don't think it's got anything to do with intelligence. And by the way, I don't know what average intelligence is. I have seen some incredibly smart people whose IQ scores were very low and vice versa. And by the way, Einstein himself didn't get very good school reports. He wasn't considered intelligent. And they didn't even say that he played nicely with the other children. So, Charlie, I wouldn't worry about that. The reason you find it tricky is because, quite frankly, it is tricky. It's tricky for all of us. But the good thing is you don't need to be an expert. And I think I've given you enough clues today and I will do in the future, of how we can get better and better at using the collective unconscious. Hilary writes, how can I allow myself to trust? Yes, well, I did say this was a leap of faith for people. I think, as the advert goes, you just have to do it. And if that's difficult, have a little think about why it might be difficult. What's getting in your way? It's probably fear. Fear of what? Fear of doing something new? Fear of doing something that's not supported by lots of scientific data? Yeah, could well be. And what's behind the fear? So have a look at what's the worst that can do. If you do embrace this concept, what is the worst that can happen? I don't suggest you make a huge financial investment based on some instinct that you get. Do your due diligence, speak to your financial advisors. But that intuition, that synchronicity, it will guide you in the right direction. I don't think you can go too far wrong, but as always, it is good to be cautious. So I hope that helps. Hilary, how can I allow myself to trust? Yeah, just do it. And in the last, we've still got a minute or two left. I've got some questions here on the webinar page. There's one from Ian again, our friend Ian. But before I come on to him, I will talk about Shaz's question. It's a simple question, a short question. I'm not sure it's simple. It says, how to attract love? ? Well, surprisingly enough, Shaz, you're not the first person that's ever asked that. Being loved by somebody, loving another person, that is definitely a reptilian instinct, but it's far more important than that. It actually probably is the most important thing that we have in our life. Well, again, you don't need to overthink this one. Your evolution or creation or your collective unconscious, all of those things are there for you to attract love. And it will happen sooner or later. And in my limited experience, it happens when you least expect it. Just like people say, you know, I'm struggling, I want to have a baby, and the babies aren't coming. What should I do? Funnily enough, often it's the same thing. The less you do, the more likely you are to have children. And I know from cases where people give up the chance of ever having children, they adopt a child, and guess what? The mother, the wife, becomes pregnant shortly afterwards. So mind and body and soul are a curious mix, which is why they're so endlessly fascinating. So how to attract love? Shaz, I think you just have to embrace the collective unconscious. I think you have to consider that you're hardwired and soft-wired to be a very lovable person. I think there are some secrets in my book, the 7 secrets, that could help you there. I think you need to put yourself into the game. If you're going to stay at home like a shrinking violet, you're not going to meet so many new people and have new thoughts. So look after yourself, be kind to yourself, do all the things that are in my book, and you will glow with personality, and you will look like a person who's comfortable in their own skin. Metaphorically, you're going to shoot a big aerial high in the sky, and you're going to send your message far and wide. And believe me, sooner or later, people will come to you. Just like the moths who give off a light at night find all of the other moths coming to introduce themselves. So I would just carry on doing what you're doing. Shaz, if you want to write to me offline, you certainly can, and I'll expand on that comment. Another question from Ian. Again, he's the person I mentioned before. I've known Ian for a number of years now. Well, I've never actually met him. He's a fellow author. And if hard work and preparation has anything to do with it, the book that he's writing at the moment is going to be a bestseller. Of course, he will need some luck as well, just like J.K. Rowling did when she did her Harry Potter books. Nobody wanted to publish them. So she got lucky, and guess what happened after that? Anyway, on to Ian's question. Hi, Steve. What's the difference between the collective unconscious and the collective conscious? And does one affect the other? Sorry, that's two questions again. It is, but I didn't say people can only ask one question, Ian, so that's okay. What's the difference between the collective unconscious and the collective conscious? I don't really know. All I know is the collective unconscious has attracted a lot more traction than the collective conscious. Generally speaking, I'm not as I say to my clients in the nicest possible way, I'm not particularly interested in what their conscious minds are thinking, because anything that comes from the conscious mind is a construct. We've reasoned it, we've tried to make it logical, where most of our best thoughts are unstructured and illogical, but those are the ones that I can work with as a therapist the best, and that as an individual, if we can connect into our collective unconscious, that's where we're going to get the biggest bang for our buck. So, Ian, I wouldn't worry too much. Thanks for the question. It made me think, but to give you a quick answer, the collective conscious, I think it's probably something that binds people together, like a shared political belief. They might vote for the same party, they might support the same soccer team or sports team or something like that. And I think that collective conscious can easily break apart under pressure. But there you go, not really an expert on that. So there we are, that's the questions. And we are out of time this week. So hope you've enjoyed the show. I'd love to hear your comments about it. I'm definitely, the hard work is done. As I said, this is work 13. We've done the hard stuff now. I think it's all downhill from now. Very practical ways to continue to bring more luck into our life, which is what this channel's all about. I'm going to make some tweaks. I'm going to try and get more people involved in the show. I'm going to have hosts and guests on the show, but that's for the future. The next programs, 2 programs at least, we're going to be talking about meditation, mindfulness, and hypnosis. All ways that we can cash in on this incredible magic thing called the collective unconscious and synchronization. So thank you for signing up. Thank you for supporting this show. And I wish you a fantastic week until our next show. I hope that that collective unconscious really gets behind you and really gives you a good kick in the right direction, and you amaze yourself with your daring and your success. Please make sure you tell me all about it. So until then, goodbye.